Let me be honest with you about something. I wasn't going to talk about this today. I had other things lined up, other angles I wanted to chase down. But then I sat down and actually listened to what came out of this panel, word for word in their own voices, and I couldn't let it go. Because what happened in the span of one conversation, one off-season camp, one back and forth between analysts who spent months dodging the real question, is actually kind of remarkable. And not in the way the highlights make it look. In the way that quiet, unscripted moments of honesty tend to be remarkable, the kind where someone says something they didn't plan to say, and suddenly the whole picture shifts. So let me walk you through exactly what happened, what was said, and why I think it matters more than anything else coming out of Cleveland right now. Going back to February 17th, that date matters. Titus is on the panel, and the conversation drifts, as it always does, toward the quarterback room. Bo asks him directly, "Do you think Shedeur Sanders can be a top 20 quarterback next year?" Simple question. Direct question. The kind of question that, if you cover football for a living and have watched the tape, you should be able to answer without flinching. And Titus flinched. He said, and I'm not exaggerating here, "I refuse to answer that question until after the draft." Now, I understood it at the time. Sort of. The draft changes things. New pieces, new context, new reasons to believe or not believe. Fine. But the draft has come and gone. The Browns made their moves. The offensive line got a serious financial commitment, somewhere in the range of $100 million when you add it all up. Free agency brought in names at receiver. The picture got clearer. So when the same panel sat down recently and Titus finally had to answer, had to face the question he'd been sitting on for months, what came out was not what I expected. He didn't hedge the way I thought he would. He didn't give me the standard, well, anything's possible, non-answer. He actually said it. He said the Browns have done an unbelievable job building this roster. He pointed to Titus Howard, to Zion Johnson, to what George Warhop could unlock if those guys play anywhere close to their ceiling. He mentioned KC Conception, Denzel Boston, Isaiah Bond, and then he said, and this is the part I keep coming back to, that yes, absolutely, Shedeur Sanders can be a top 20 quarterback in 2026. With the caveat, always the caveat with this panel, the caveat being that Shedeur has to learn to take the layup. That's the thing, isn't it? That's the central tension in the entire Shedeur Sanders debate, and Titus articulated it better than I've heard anyone articulate it this offseason. Shedeur is a guy who skips the routine throw to go for the spectacular one. And in college, at Colorado, with his dad building the program around him, that tendency was half the reason people fell in love with watching him play. The deep ball on 3rd and long when everyone in the stadium knew it was coming. The improvised throw off his back foot under pressure. The kind of play that makes a highlight reel and sometimes makes a defense look foolish. But the NFL is different. The NFL punishes you for skipping the check down, for holding the ball an extra half second looking for the great play when the good play is sitting open in front of you. And what Titus was essentially saying is that Shedeur's greatest strength, that competitive instinct to go for broke, is also the thing that got him in trouble last year, because the receivers he was trusting to win those contested situations weren't ready to win them consistently. That's an important point. It's not just on Shedeur. Titus made that distinction clearly. He said Shedeur fell victim to trusting his teammates, and their ability didn't always materialize. So you had a quarterback willing to take the shot, and receivers who weren't yet able to consistently make those shots count. That's a development problem across the board, not just a quarterback problem. And now, heading into 2026, the argument is that the environment around him has changed enough that those same tendencies could start producing different outcomes. But here's where the conversation got genuinely interesting to me, and where I think the real story lives. Because right around the middle of this discussion, someone brought up what happens if things go the other direction. What happens if Deshaun Watson wins the quarterback competition? And I want to be careful here, because the way this question landed on the panel, and the way they answered it, told me something about how they actually view Watson beneath all the optimistic framing. Think about the framing of the question itself. If Watson wins the competition. Already embedded in that phrase is the acknowledgement that winning it is not guaranteed, that Shedeur is a real competitor in this race, and that the outcome is not predetermined no matter how many times Titus Monk says Watson's name in press availabilities. And when Titus addressed the scenario where Watson comes out on top, the answer was revealing in ways I don't think he intended. He talked about Watson needing to replicate the confidence and swagger that Shedeur already brought to that huddle. He said, and I wrote this down because it stopped me cold, that there were moments last season where that offense genuinely believed they could win the game, and that Shedeur Sanders was the reason they believed it. Stop and sit with that for a second. We spent the better part of last season being told that Shedeur was a project, that he was raw, that the moment was too big, that you couldn't expect anything from a rookie with weapons that thin. And here's Titus Powell, the same analyst who wouldn't call him a top 20 quarterback before the draft, now telling you that Shedeur already gave that offense something that Deshaun Watson, at his healthiest and most expensive, never quite managed to give them. Belief. Genuine, in-the-moment belief that the game could be won. That is not a small thing. In professional football, that is actually one of the most important things a quarterback can give his team, and Shedeur apparently gave it to that offense last year, with Jerry Jeudy dropping passes and the offensive line looking like it was assembled at a discount. Just let that land where it needs to land. Now, I'm not here to tell you that Deshaun Watson is finished. I actually think the most honest version of this conversation requires me to acknowledge something real. New offensive scheme, new head coach, different system, different demands. Quarterbacks have revived their careers under those circumstances before. It happens. Titus made that point, and it's not a crazy point. The question everyone's asking is whether Watson's struggles the last several years were about fit and context, or whether they were about the kind of physical and mental deterioration that doesn't reverse itself regardless of the playbook. And the honest answer is, we don't know yet. We won't know until those OTAS reps start rolling and the tape starts to speak. But what I do know is this: the panel itself, while discussing Watson's potential comeback, could not stop circling back to one inconvenient number: $185 million. That's what the Browns paid Deshaun Watson. And out of that $185 million, what they received in return was approximately 3 games worth of genuinely good football. 3, not 3 seasons. 3 games. And someone on the panel, I think it was Dustin, said it plainly. The check clears, the money is gone, and at this point the financial commitment should not be the reason you hand Watson the starting job. That's a sunk cost argument, and in economics it's straightforward. You don't keep pouring resources into a failing investment just because you've already invested a lot. You make decisions based on what gives you the best chance going forward. And if you apply that logic to this quarterback competition, then the question is not about who you paid more. It's about who gives this football team the best chance to win in 2026. And the panel, despite months of Watson optimism, seems to be arriving, slowly, reluctantly, in the way that honest people arrive at uncomfortable conclusions, at the realization that the answer to that question might not be the one they spent the offseason preparing for. There's a moment in the conversation where someone raises the point about Watson's urgency. The argument being that Watson knows this is his last shot, that he's going into this off-season camp breathing, eating, and sleeping football, that a man with his back against the wall finds something he didn't have when the position felt secure. And I'll grant you that. Desperation can be a motivator. I've seen athletes turn urgency into performance before. But here's my honest reaction when I heard that argument. If Deshaun Watson needs to feel his career threatening to end before he's willing to go all in, then what exactly were we getting for the previous several seasons? What was the excuse when the contract was fresh and the city was behind him and the team was built around making him the centerpiece? If the competitive fire only shows up when the alternative is retirement, then what does that say about everything that came before? And then there's the Titus Monk angle, which I think is actually underrated in this whole conversation. The panel keeps coming back to the idea that Monk is different from Kevin Stefanski, more direct, more willing to say what he means and hold people accountable in public. The suggestion being that Watson never really thrived in Stefanski's offense, that there was some philosophical mismatch between what Watson wants to do and what Stefanski asked him to do. And maybe that's partially true, but I keep thinking about Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield, who is nobody's idea of an elite quarterback, had genuine success running that same Stefanski system. So the narrative that Stefanski's scheme made Watson look bad has some real holes in it, and I'm not sure a change of offensive coordinator is the magic cure that some people in Cleveland are hoping it is. What Monk brings that matters more, I think, is the willingness to be transparent. Titus said it on the panel. Monk is going to be upfront with Shedeur about what he needs to work on. He's not going to bury the feedback or soften it to the point where the message gets lost. And for a young quarterback trying to identify the gaps in his game and close them before the season starts, that kind of honest coaching relationship is worth more than any scheme adjustment. It's worth more than any offensive line upgrade. Because if Shedeur genuinely understands what he needs to do differently, take the layup, protect the football, move the chains on third and manageable, and if he has a coaching staff willing to reinforce that message clearly and consistently, then the version of Shedeur Sanders we see in 2026 could look substantially different from the version we saw in his rookie year. And that's the thing that nobody in the Watson camp wants to fully confront. Shedeur Sanders was a rookie last season, playing behind one of the worst offensive lines in the conference, with receivers who couldn't consistently win at the top of their routes, with a coaching staff that, through no fault of anyone's intentions, was not optimally constructed to develop a young quarterback. And even in those circumstances, even with all of that stacked against him, there were moments, actual documented moments that the panel keeps bringing up, where that huddle believed, where the offense thought they could win, where Shedeur did something that made people stop and say, "I haven't seen a Browns quarterback do that in a long time." That is the foundation. That is what you're building on going into this competition. And on the other side of the ledger, you have a quarterback who was given the absolute maximum in terms of investment, support, and organizational commitment, $185 million, a roster built around his preferences, a fan base that wanted desperately to believe. And he delivered 3 good games. 3. That is the foundation you are building on with Deshaun Watson. Now you tell me which foundation you'd rather build on. The tape is going to roll. That's the line I keep coming back to from this entire conversation. Titus said it, and he's right. You can argue about contracts and potential and schemes and urgency all you want, but eventually the football gets snapped and the camera records what happens and there's nowhere to hide. The team will see it. The coaching staff will see it. The reporters who get access to practice will see it. And slowly, organically, the way these things always happen in professional football, the guys in that locker room will start gravitating toward the quarterback who makes them believe. Not the quarterback with the biggest contract, not the quarterback with the most accomplished past. The one who makes them feel, in the middle of a practice rep or a 7-on-7 drill or a 2-minute drive situation, that this team has a chance. Shedeur Sanders already did that once, with nothing. With the bare minimum around him, he made that offense believe. Now he walks into 2026 with Casey Conception, with Denzel Boston, with Spencer Fono, with $100 million committed to protecting him. And the panel that spent months refusing to answer the top 20 question just sat down and said, out loud, in their own words, that there is greatness inside Shedeur Sanders. That they're curious whether he can sustain it for 4 full quarters, that the pieces are now in place to find out. That's where we are. That's the real story coming out of Cleveland this offseason. Not the Watson comeback narrative. Not the press conference optimism. The quiet, reluctant, honest admission from people who cover this team every day that they believe something might be happening with this young quarterback. Something they didn't fully see coming. Something the tape is eventually going to confirm or deny. I just think, and this is me being honest with you the same way that panel was being honest when they thought nobody was paying close enough attention, I think the tape is going to confirm it.